Captain Leora Vey sat in the dimly lit bridge of the Epsilon, staring at the endless darkness outside. The stars, once her guides, now seemed cold and distant, as if mocking her helplessness. Her ship, a state-of-the-art exploration vessel, was crippled. The engines had failed after a meteor storm tore through the ship's outer hull, leaving it drifting silently in deep space. Every system was failing, and the life support was barely keeping the crew alive. Leora felt the weight of responsibility, pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. Every decision, every command she had given now seemed insignificant against the vast, uncaring void. She watched the crew moving through the narrow corridors, faces pale, eyes wide with fear, hands shaking. Even the strongest among them, Lieutenant Ral, who usually carried himself with quiet confidence, looked uncertain, his jaw tight and eyes darting to the flickering status monitors. "Captain," the communications officer called, her voice trembling. "All our distress signals have been ignored." "No response. It's like we're invisible out here." Leora swallowed hard. "We are not invisible," she said softly, trying to convince herself as much as the officer. Someone will see us. We just have to hold on." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. She could not shake the feeling that the galaxy was indifferent to their suffering. Here, in this remote sector far from any trade routes or friendly colonies, lost ships were rarely found. And yet, Leora refused to surrender to despair. She had trained for crises, for situations that seemed impossible. She knew fear could spread faster than fire, and if it consumed the crew, survival would be impossible. She walked among her people, placing a hand on the shoulder of the youngest engineer. "I know it's hard," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "I know it feels like no one will come, but we must not give up. We are humans, and humans do not give up, not even in the darkest corners of the universe." The engineer looked up at her, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But Captain, we're running out of food. Water is low. Oxygen—" "I know," Leora interrupted gently. "And that is why we have to stay strong. We cannot let fear take us. If we give in, then it is over, but if we hold on, if we survive until someone comes, we have a chance." The crew moved quietly, each person lost in thought, their minds replaying memories of home, of friends and family waiting somewhere in the galaxy. Each remembered the warm light of their planets, the sound of laughter, the comfort of knowing someone was out there. Now, all of that seemed so far away. And yet those memories were the very thing keeping them alive, a faint ember in the darkness that refused to die. Leora returned to the bridge, her hands gripping the console. She stared at the small, blinking light on the navigation display that marked their position, a tiny dot in a vast black sea. How many ships had been lost in this same expanse, never to be seen again? How many voices had cried out in the void, only to be swallowed by silence? Her mind wandered to the crew, her responsibility, for their lives. Each one depended on her decisions, on her courage, and in that moment she made a promise not just to herself but to every soul aboard the Epsilon. "We will not die out here," she whispered into the emptiness. "Someone will come. Someone will find us. And when they do, we will be ready." The silence returned thick and heavy, pressing against the walls of the ship. But deep inside, a small spark of hope remained. Leora held onto it like a lifeline, knowing that even the smallest light could guide them through the endless darkness of deep space. Outside, the stars continued to twinkle, distant and cold. But in the hearts of the stranded crew, a quiet determination began to grow. They were lost, but not defeated. Not yet. Far from the Epsilon, hidden in the shadows of a nearby asteroid belt, a sleek alien vessel drifted silently. The E3, a cold and calculating species known for hunting lost ships, observed the human craft with sharp, unblinking eyes. Their long, spindly limbs moved with precision across the control panels of their bridge, every motion deliberate and controlled. "They are weak," the E3 commander hissed, his voice like ice through the translator. Stranded in the void. Alone, without hope. We could claim them. Parts, technology, even prisoners. And no one would ever know. On board the Epsilon, the crew had no idea of the danger lurking nearby. They were consumed by their own fear, fighting to keep hope alive in the endless dark. Every creak of the damaged hull, every flicker of a dying console, reminded them that death might come from the void itself. But in reality, the threat was far closer and far more intelligent than the random chaos of space. Lieutenant Raoul paced the corridors, his hands clenched into fists. "Captain," he said when he found her in the engineering bay, "we need to consider every option. If no one comes, we might not survive." Leora shook her head firmly. "We don't give up, Raoul. I will not allow it. Not while there's even a sliver of hope." Raoul's eyes softened, but doubt lingered. He had seen enough tragedy in his years of service to know that hope could be a cruel thing. Still, he followed the captain's lead, knowing her determination was stronger than any fear he carried. Meanwhile, the E3 monitored the crew's movements with cold amusement. They studied the humans' behavior, noting their small acts of kindness, their moments of courage, even the silent despair that sometimes flickered across their faces. The aliens did not understand these emotions, they had no equivalent, but something about them made the E3 pause. "They fight to survive," one E3 officer remarked, "even knowing we could destroy them." "Why?" The commander did not answer. He only watched. To the E3, emotions were weaknesses, yet these humans clung to something invisible, something intangible that made them unpredictable. Back on the Epsilon, the crew tried to maintain routines. Meals were rationed, systems patched as best they could, and the youngest crew members were encouraged to rest even as fear whispered that sleep could be the last thing they experienced. Leora moved among them constantly, offering quiet words of encouragement. "You are stronger than you know," she said to the navigator, who had been trembling for hours. "Every choice you make keeps us alive. Every moment you hold on is proof that we are not done." For a brief moment, the navigator's fear eased, replaced by determination. She nodded silently, gripping the console with renewed purpose. But the shadows outside the ship grew longer. The E3 vessel slowly moved closer, assessing the humans, deciding when, or if, they would strike. It was a silent threat, invisible and patient, and it made every heartbeat on the Epsilon feel heavier. Leora returned to the bridge, staring at the distant stars, thinking about the fragility of life and the endless dangers of space. She knew that not all threats could be seen, not all enemies were obvious, and yet she refused to let fear dominate her crew. Even in the cold, indifferent void, the humans clung to hope. They shared stories of home, whispered memories of loved ones, and laughed softly when despair threatened to take over. It was these small acts, small sparks of humanity, that the E3 could not predict, the moments that made the humans dangerous in a way no one else could understand. And somewhere in the darkness, as the alien ship watched silently, the seeds of a coming confrontation began to take root. The E3 thought the humans were helpless, that their fate was sealed. But even in their ignorance, they did not yet understand the force they were observing. Humans, unbroken, even when lost in the endless void of deep space. By the fifth day drifting in the cold, empty reaches of space, the crew of the Epsilon felt the weight of despair pressing harder than ever. The food rations were nearly gone, water was measured in small, desperate sips, and oxygen levels were dropping faster than the engineers could manage. Every alarm that beeped on the console sounded like a countdown to the inevitable. Captain Leora Vey moved quietly through the corridors, watching her crew struggle to keep going. Faces pale, eyes hollow from exhaustion, hands trembling as they tried to perform tasks they had done countless times before. She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of fear and frustration. "We cannot give up," she whispered to herself, almost as if saying it aloud could make it true. Lieutenant Raoul was in the engineering bay, working tirelessly to patch the failing engines. Sparks flew, and the smell of burning circuits filled the small room. Sweat ran down his forehead as he muttered, "If we can just get one system back online. Maybe, just maybe." His words trailed off as the engines emitted a low, angry hum and then went silent. The hope he had tried to hold on to dissolved into the same void that surrounded them. On the bridge, Leora stared at the navigation screen, which showed nothing but empty stars stretching into infinity. She tried contacting nearby systems, sending repeated distress calls, each one fading into the silent void. No response. No one came. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for the communicator. "This is Captain Vey of the Epsilon," she said, voice trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. "We are stranded in deep space. Any help, any assistance, please respond." Only static answered. The silence was deafening. It pressed down on them, heavier than the void outside. For the first time, some crew members allowed themselves to speak the fears that had been buried deep inside. Maybe no one is coming," whispered the young navigator, her voice shaking as she hugged her knees in the corner. "Maybe we're alone." Even Leora felt the creeping doubt. She had spent her life preparing for emergencies, for impossible odds. Yet this unending silence, the vast emptiness, the relentless failure of systems, tested her like nothing before. For a moment she felt herself trembling, wanting to believe that maybe it was all over, that perhaps the universe had forgotten them, but she refused to give in. Not yet. She walked among the crew, placing a hand on shoulders, offering words of encouragement even when her own heart felt heavy. "I know it feels hopeless," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear she hid behind it. "I know. It feels like no one is coming, but we cannot give up. We are humans, and humans do not give up, even when everything seems lost." The crew looked up at her, eyes glistening with tears, and for a moment, hope flickered. It was fragile, like a candle in the wind, but it was there. Each small spark, each shared smile or whispered reassurance, became a lifeline. They held on to it, even as the life support systems groaned and alarms warned that oxygen would last less than a day if nothing was fixed. Outside, the stars continued to shine coldly, uncaring, endless. But inside the ship, a quiet determination began to grow. Leora could feel it in the small acts of bravery around her. The engineer refusing to stop working, the navigator steadying herself despite fear, the crew helping one another without complaint. And somewhere deep in her heart, a single thought took root, stronger than any fear. They might be lost now, but they were not defeated. They could not see it yet, but hope had not abandoned them. As long as even one person on the Epsilon refused to surrender, there was a chance that someone, somewhere, would see them, a chance that humanity itself would not leave them behind. For now, the darkness pressed in, and despair lingered, like a shadow. But Leora whispered again to herself and to the crew who could hear, "Hold on, we are not done, not yet. Someone will come." The fifth night drifting in endless darkness had stretched longer than any the crew of the Epsilon had ever imagined. Captain Leora Vey sat on the bridge, her hands gripping the console, eyes fixed on the blinking stars beyond. Every sound of the ship creaking or a console flickering sent a shiver through the crew. They were exhausted, hungry, afraid, and yet they clung desperately to hope, fragile as it was. Suddenly the communicator crackled. Static filled the bridge, making the crew jump. Leora's heart raced. She had almost stopped listening to the endless silence, almost allowed despair to silence her hope. But now there was a sound, something alive in the void. "This is the indomitable human warship. You are not alone. We are here." The voice was deep, steady, calm, unshakable. The words cut through the oppressive silence like a blade, sharp and clear. The bridge went completely silent. Crew members stared at one another, unable to believe what they had just heard. A human warship? Here? In this remote, dangerous part of the galaxy? Leora's hands shook as she responded, her voice trembling. Who is this? How did you find us? The reply came instantly with no hesitation. We are humans. You are our own. Hold tight. We are coming and nothing will stop us. Tears welled in Leora's eyes. Relief, disbelief, joy, all collided in a storm of emotions she could barely contain. She turned to her crew. Do you hear that? She whispered, voice breaking. We're not alone. Humanity. They're coming. The young navigator dropped to her knees, tears streaming freely. I thought we'd never see anyone again, she choked. The crew gathered around her, some hugging each other, others simply staring in awe at the console. For the first time in days, hope was real, tangible, alive. Even Lieutenant E. Ral, who had been quiet and tense for hours, allowed himself a small smile. Humans actually found us, he murmured, disbelief in his tone. They came for us. Outside, the endless black expanse seemed suddenly less threatening. The stars were still cold, indifferent, but the humans aboard the Epsilon no longer felt alone in the void. Every small worry, every ache from hunger or exhaustion faded slightly in the overwhelming relief of knowing they were being rescued. Leora stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the distant darkness. They don't even know us, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. And yet, they didn't hesitate. They came. For the first time in days, the crew allowed themselves to dream. They imagined the massive hull of a human warship appearing in the distance, its engines glowing with unstoppable energy. They imagined safety, warmth, food, clean air, and most importantly, a chance to survive. But even in their joy, Leora did not let them forget the dangers that surrounded them. Stay alert, she said softly, her voice strong again. We don't know what else is out there, but we will hold on, and help is on the way. The crew worked together, checking systems, stabilizing the ship, preparing for the unknown. Every beep of the console, every flicker of light, felt like a heartbeat in the long, dark night. Each moment passed slowly, but the knowledge that rescue was coming made time itself seem lighter, less oppressive. In the distance, unseen by the crew, the E3 patrol noticed the sudden signal. Their cold eyes widened in surprise. Humans, the commander whispered, his voice tinged with something unfamiliar. Caution. They've come for them. And so in the emptiness of space, a shift began. The crew of the Epsilon held on to hope as never before. For the first time they believed, not just in survival, but in the unshakable truth of humanity, that no one, no matter how lost, would ever be abandoned. The void was still vast, still dangerous, but a new force was moving through it, a force that would change everything. The arrival of humanity, unstoppable, unwavering, and coming without hesitation. The crew of the Epsilon hardly dared to breathe. Outside, the vast blackness of space seemed to hold its own anticipation. And then, faint but unmistakable, lights appeared on the horizon, blinking steadily, glowing with a strength that seemed impossible in this lonely sector. The Indomitable was approaching. Captain, Lieutenant Ral whispered, his voice trembling. They're here. They're actually coming. Leora's chest swelled with emotion. Relief, joy, and a fierce determination surged through her at once. Hold tight, she said, voice firm but choked with tears. We're about to be safe. But stay ready. Space is never simple. No sooner had she spoken than the E3 patrol reacted. Their long, spindly ships moved with deadly speed, surrounding the Epsilon, weapons glowing ominously. The aliens had planned to claim the human ship for themselves. They were fast, precise, and unyielding. Yet they had underestimated the force that was coming to protect the stranded crew. The Indomitable appeared suddenly, massive and glowing with energy. Its engines flared brightly, cutting through the darkness with the hum of immense power. It moved like a predator, deliberate and unstoppable, placing itself between the I-3 and the helpless Epsilon. The first blasts of alien fire struck near the warship, and the vacuum of space shook with the echo of energy discharges. The Epsilon trembled in its hull, alarms screaming, and the crew clung to whatever they could hold. Leora gritted her teeth. She had hoped for rescue, but this was no simple arrival. This was a battle, a demonstration of humanity's unyielding resolve. "Brace yourselves," Leora commanded. "We're not out of danger yet." From the bridge, the crew of the Indomitable responded with precision. Its weapons unleashed bolts of pure energy that tore through the void, disabling the I-3 ships one by one. Explosions lit the darkness, illuminating the terrified and awed faces of Epsilon's crew. Sparks danced across the hull as energy shields flared and deflected the alien attacks. Lieutenant Raoul could hardly believe his eyes. "They're saving us," he whispered, awestruck, "and they don't even know us." The Indomitable moved like a wall of fire, shielding the drifting Epsilon. Every maneuver, every shot, every shield adjustment was precise, unhesitating. The E3, confident moments before, now faltered under the might of humanity. Their movements became chaotic, uncoordinated, as if the universe itself had shifted against them. On the Epsilon, the crew felt something they hadn't dared to feel in days. Safety. Not complete safety, but hope strong enough to chase away despair. Some held each other tightly, others whispered prayers, but all of them stared in wonder at the human warship defending them so fiercely, so without hesitation. Leora felt a surge of gratitude she could barely describe. She knew that this moment would define everything, proof that humans did not abandon their own, no matter how distant, no matter how desperate. "We're not alone," she whispered, voice breaking with emotion. "Humanity doesn't leave anyone behind." The E3, stunned by the power and determination of the humans, finally began to retreat, their confidence shattered. Even the commander, who had never felt fear before, hesitated as he watched. The Indomitable advanced with unstoppable force, and so, amidst the debris of distant meteors and the glow of laser fire, the Epsilon was saved. Not by chance, not by luck, but by the unwavering will of humans who refused to abandon one another. The stars, once cold and unfeeling, now reflected the strength of something far greater: courage, unity, and hope. For the crew of the Epsilon, the terror of being lost in deep space was ending. For the E3, a lesson had begun. Humans did not hesitate. Humans did not falter. And anyone who thought they could prey on the helpless would soon learn the true cost of crossing them. The deafening silence of space was suddenly broken by the hum of the Indomitable's massive engines as it approached the Epsilon. The human warship moved with the authority of a giant, unstoppable force, placing itself perfectly to shield the drifting vessel from the retreating I-3 patrol. The glow from its engines bathed the Epsilon in light, a beacon of hope after days of darkness. Captain Leora Vey stood on the bridge, tears streaming down her face. She could barely believe what she was seeing. "They're here, they came," she whispered. The relief was overwhelming, almost too heavy to bear. The crew clutched each other, some laughing quietly through tears, others silently praying, in awe. But there was no time for celebration. The E3 ships, wounded but not defeated, had regrouped. Weapons flared, energy beams cutting through the void, aimed at the humans who dared to challenge them. Leora's stomach tightened. She watched, the Indomitable respond instantly, its weapons firing with terrifying precision. The alien ships faltered under the relentless human assault, one by one exploding into bright clouds of debris that lit the darkness. Lieutenant Raoul could hardly believe his eyes. They're wiping them out," he shouted. No hesitation, no mercy, just humans. From the bridge of the Indomitable, the captain spoke over the comm. Her voice was calm, yet carried the weight of authority that left no room for doubt. "We don't leave anyone behind, not a single human, not a single friend. You are safe now." The crew of the Epsilon stared at the massive warship, each word sinking deep into their hearts. They felt a warmth spreading through them, a fierce pride and a sense of belonging they hadn't felt in days. The terror, the despair, the loneliness. All of it was being swept away by the arrival of humanity's thunder. Engineers and crew members worked together to stabilize the Epsilon, aided remotely by the systems of the Indomitable. Lights flickered, back on, alarms quieted, and the life support systems began to stabilize. Slowly, carefully, the humans aboard the Epsilon started to breathe again, as if realizing for the first time in days that they were truly alive. Leora moved to the observation deck and looked out at the stars, now illuminated by the warship's glow. She saw the defeated E3 ships retreating, their arrogance shattered. She felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her to her knees. Humanity had arrived, unhesitating, unstoppable, and it had saved them when all seemed lost. On the bridge, the young navigator turned to Leora, her voice trembling. "Captain, they didn't even know us, and yet they risked everything." Leora nodded, a fierce smile breaking through her tears. "That's what it means to be human. We do not abandon our own. Not now, not ever." The Indomitable moved closer, extending docking arms toward the Epsilon. The connection was precise, careful, and yet unyielding. For the first time, the crew felt the full weight of safety. They would leave the void behind, leave the cold, endless darkness and step into warmth and security. As the docking was completed, crew members began to transfer from the drifting ship to the human warship. Hugs, tears, and whispered words of gratitude filled the corridors. Every rescued human carried a story of fear, hope, and resilience, a story that would now be shared with others, a testimony to the strength and unbreakable spirit of humanity. Leora took one last look at the stars outside, the infinite void that had once threatened to swallow them. She whispered softly, almost as if speaking to the universe itself. "We were lost, but we were never alone." Somewhere out there, the E3 would remember this day. They would remember that humans did not hesitate. They did not falter, and anyone who dared to cross them or prey on the helpless would soon understand the true meaning of human strength. The crew of the Epsilon, once lost and desperate, now stood safe aboard the Indomitable. They had seen humanity's thunder firsthand. They had felt the courage, determination, and unwavering loyalty that defined their species. And in that moment, they knew the universe would never be the same again. Weeks had passed since the crew of the Epsilon had been rescued. The endless black void of deep space, which had once felt so threatening and unyielding, now seemed almost distant in memory. Standing on the observation deck of the Indomitable, Captain Leora Vey watched the stars glide past at impossible speeds, feeling a sense of awe and gratitude she had never known before. The crew, once frightened and broken, had transformed. They moved with renewed purpose, their faces bright with life and hope. Conversations were filled with laughter again, small jokes, and stories of home. Even the youngest navigator, who had spent days cowering in fear, now stood tall, eyes sparkling with courage and pride. Leora turned to her crew, a smile on her face that carried both relief and fierce determination. "We were lost, and yet here we are, alive, together. Humanity didn't forget us, and neither should we forget what we are capable of." Lieutenant Raoul nodded quietly. "They didn't even know us," he said, his voice low but filled with reverence. "And they came anyway. No hesitation. Nothing could stop them." That was the essence of humanity. Not strength, not numbers, not weapons alone, but loyalty, courage, and the refusal to abandon those in need. The crew felt it in their bones, in the way the Indomitable had shielded them from the E3, in the way humanity's reach had extended across the void to bring them home. Outside, the distant remnants of the E3 fleet still lingered, scarred and cautious. The aliens had learned painfully that humans did not hesitate, humans did not falter, and anyone who believed they could prey upon the helpless would soon face the thunder of humanity's resolve. Back aboard the Indomitable, Leora walked through the corridors where her crew mingled with the rescuers. Hugs were exchanged, tears shed, and stories recounted. Each human on board had a part of the adventure etched into their hearts, a story of fear, survival, and the unbreakable strength of humanity. For Leora, the greatest lesson was simple. Hope, when combined with action, could move mountains, even across the endless darkness of space. She looked at her crew, at the faces shining with gratitude and renewed life, and realized that the void had not defeated them. It had only shown the power of courage, unity, and unyielding spirit. The young navigator, now standing beside her, whispered, "Captain, will we ever see them again? The humans who saved us?" Leora smiled, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "We may someday. But even if we don't, we will never forget. And the universe will remember. Humanity doesn't abandon its own." In the quiet of the observation deck, the crew gazed out at the stars, no longer as prisoners of the void, but as witnesses to the unstoppable force that was humanity. Each star, each distant planet, each shadow of space seemed smaller now, as if the courage and resolve of humans had made the infinite less frightening. And somewhere deep in the hearts of all aboard, a seed had grown, a promise. The universe might be vast and indifferent, but humans were relentless. Humans were protectors. Humans were survivors. And wherever life struggled, wherever hope seemed lost, humanity would be there, moving without hesitation, burning bright like a star that refused to fade. Captain Leora took one last look at the dark expanse beyond the observation deck, then turned to her crew. "We were lost, but we were never alone. Remember this. Remember who we are, and carry it with you wherever we go." The crew nodded silently, feeling the truth of her words echo deep in their hearts. The void had tested them, challenged them, and nearly defeated them. But they had survived. And in surviving, they had seen something extraordinary, the full, unstoppable power of humanity, a force that would forever change the galaxy. The stars shimmered in the distance, the darkness, still vast, still mysterious. But for the crew of the Epsilon, for every human who had reached across the void to save them, a new dawn had begun, a dawn of hope, courage, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. And in that new dawn, they knew one thing for certain. Humanity never hesitates. Humanity never abandons. Humanity is unstoppable.